So unless somebody's going to do this as their topic, I would like to just have a word about this morning's press conference in London. Is anybody going to take this as the...
No.
No?
I was going to, but I can find something else for me.
I would not like to have a word about this then.
No, I don't have anything to say.
No. Because if that's your topic, we're going to talk about it.
I don't have any. It's not a topic. It's a subject.
What the heck does that mean?
It's like, go for it, man.
But is this going to be your show?
No. I was going to do it for members.
He's lying.
No.
Well, you can still do it for your show because nobody watches this one.
We're 30 seconds in, and there's not a damn clue. The thing's just shot to hell already.
We could just run last week's.
I think we should have read the minutes from last week's meeting. I think we should have saluted the flag. We should have had a moment of silence where you could worship your gods or your various other pagan deities, and follow Robert's Rules of Orders. This meeting is really too haphazard. So what this is what you see here, which is not much. I'm Scott Ott, and Bill Whittle is wearing the blue crew shirt today, and Stephen Green.
It's you never know when you may have to do some chroma key work. That's my my motto.
And just invisible out your chest.
You never know when one of our members might have to do some chroma key work on the Backstage episode after we post it. Not that I'm suggesting that.
Stranger things have happened, I'm sure.
So anyway, I just this is not my topic for this week. My topic is much better than this, but I did see the news conference at just outside of number 10 Downing Street, where outgoing Prime Minister Theresa May, who's lost her perch due to her waffling and equivocating, I think, on how to approach the Brexit issue, right after a meeting with President Donald Trump of the United States of America, the country that conquered Theresa May's empire, they had a news conference outside, and they just kind of gave pleasantries and then answered a couple of questions. And I guess we talked about this on the backstage meeting, but it just, I don't know why, when you're making $400,000 a year and you've got everybody in the world waiting upon you and you don't have to do anything for yourself, you can't take 3 minutes and review the speech script.
I'm telling you, his motto should be "winging it since 1977." And he's winged his way into billions of dollars in the White House. I'm not going to complain too much.
He reviews scripts for prime ministers who've got a future. The ones that have already been fired, get fired.
I like the prime ministers who didn't just lose a vote of no confidence.
That's right. That's exactly right.
There's a good obscure reference. What is that? That's like a 2 or 3 year old reference now. I wonder how many of our members will catch it. That's very good. I guess what surprised me is not so much like the speech was fine, and the way he answered questions from the press was fine. But it just struck me that Theresa May, who really came across almost Thatcherian in the way she delivered her speech, then hands it over to President Trump, who immediately... Go ahead.
If she had an ounce more than Thatcher in her, she would be PM today, and Brexit would be a done deal.
Yes. Well, she was wearing a dress the same color as Bill's shirt, so she had that going for her. So we can.
These colors are reserved unto Hillary Clinton and Hillary Clinton only.
We can chroma key out Theresa May, just have her head suspended like that Barnabas Collins from Dark Shadows, just floating in the air. But anyway, I guess I know that he is what he is, and this is what we voted for, and this is what we get. But it just seems to me that maybe take a few minutes out of watching Hannity on Fox and just pick up the script and give it the once over before you're standing, after meeting with the Queen next to number 10 Downing Street. I'm the only one. I'm the only one who cares about this.
Pretty much.
It's just nobody cares.
Obama gave a great speech, read right off that teleprompter like a real pro.
Yeah, but it's not like, why do we have to have either or? Like, either you get a guy who reads well off a teleprompter, or you get this.
Well, or we go back to George W. Bush, who couldn't even read off the teleprompter most days.
Now, come now. He got better grades than Obama did in college.
has nothing to do with his speech.
I think the press is just amazed that he didn't show up in coveralls and with a frickin' weed in his mouth, just chewing on a weed.
That was straw,
a big tattered straw hat.
The day before,
Bill. That's the wrong cliche.
I could never.
Did you see the pictures? The hair pictures?
Oh yeah, with the slick back thing on.
Yeah,
Sunday.
Apparently he was out on the golf course, and then he had an event to do, and there was apparently no time for him to do his full grooming regimen, and so he shows up without a hat on, looking like he's wearing a hat. So his hair was actually slicked back and over his ears, and immediately the British Daily Sun, I think, put a picture of him next to a picture of Michael Douglas playing Gordon Gekko in Wall Street.
Well, you know what, though? His hairline is much closer to here than I ever would have thought it actually was, based on that slick back thing. I just realized why I could never or should never be president. I would show up at every single meeting with a foreign head of state, and I would start things off by saying, I can have a flight of B-2 bombers here in 12 hours, or really anywhere on the earth. Just saying.
Well, and I don't think the picture thing isn't a big deal. I think what says more about the media than it does about Trump, that the fact that they immediately would go, oh my goodness, his hair's groomed differently. Here, he looks like Gordon Gekko, and all the evil that portends. So Bill has this week's episode's members special episode, as well as the regular episode. And he's clearly not going to do this topic that I just did, which wasn't really a topic at all. But let me just finish up that little thought by saying I think that he carried himself well after he got done the speech. I think he was circumspect in handling questions where the media was clearly baiting him to say something bad about the mayor of London. And the worst thing he said was he thinks he's kind of a negative character. But it wasn't. He didn't really go off on him. And the whole time they kept cutting on MSNBC. They kept cutting to shots of trying to prove that there was a huge crowd of protest against President Trump, which Trump himself said he didn't really see any crowds of protests. It was a very small group by the airport. And MSNBC says, well, the numbers are down from the last time when they had like 250,000. There are probably several tens of thousands here now. But the reason for that, obviously, as you can see, is that there's a little bit of rain. It's like drizzling, It's like there's some rain here, and the novelty is worn off because this is his second. Like MSNBC is making excuses for why there weren't more people protesting the president of their country.
If there's anything that scares off Londoners, it's a little rain and fog.
Okay, that's it. That's all I thought. Bill Whittle, what would you like to talk about on this week's episodes of Right Angle?
I think for the main one, there's a story on the major headline on Drudge's Big Tech faces antitrust crackdown. We've covered this kind of thing before. The thing that interests me is that this is something, it's one of the few things that, and I have to say I'm surprised that the Democrats are behind this, but this seems to be the thing that people on the left and people on the right are both in favor of. But I'm not interested so much in talking about that again because we've kind of covered that a few times before. I'm interested in what a world would look like if this is successful. Because if it's being broke up and the Republican support for it is that it's being broke up on the basis of bias, what would society look like if Facebook and Google, especially Google because of the search action, but if Facebook and Google and YouTube were politically neutral, what would America look like?
Interesting.
We know what America looks like when the enormous power of the richest companies and the highest technologies in the world are suppressing everything we're trying to say. But what we don't know is what it would look like if, forget conservative bias, I don't want conservative bias, just plain unbiased distribution of videos based on the number of people who subscribe to them and search engines that were returning the most relevant result, not the most relevant politically correct result, and all the rest of it.
Well, Bill, we just did that episode of Bill Whittle Now where we dealt with the progressive writer who was basically saying that conservatives have won Facebook, and because of their whining, they got the algorithms changed so that I think it was Vox that did this story.
No, it was Daily Kos.
was Daily Kos. That's right. I'm the guy who researched the topic. I ambushed Bill with the topic, and he remembers it. So
I remember it because it was so ridiculous.
Yes.
And it's a preemptive attack against this kind of thing, right? So I said that before. I said the reason they're claiming conservatives control Facebook and Google and YouTube, but especially Facebook, our conservative control of Facebook, they're saying this as a preemptive tool. They're trying to put some evidence on the table to say that no, it's not everything biased against conservatives. Look, here's an article saying there's some bias for conservatives. It's just peppering the landscape with strawmen for them to knock down later, and they're not much in the way of straw as far as that one goes. But I do think it would be interesting to talk about this as a because I think this is actually a possibility, and the reason I think it's an actual possibility is because it's a Democrat leading the House Judiciary? No,
Commerce.
Is it Commerce?
Judiciary Committee Chairman.
It is
Jerry
Judiciary.
Nadler.
Okay.
So if you got a Democrat leading this charge, you're going to find people like Ted Cruz and so on, and conservative Republicans and most Republicans, I think, would be in favor of it. The ethics of it we've discussed before. They are private companies. We agree with all of that, but I think they violated the public trust by basically determining for you what messages are going to get through and what are not going to get through based on their decision of your politics.
Well, and without being open about that. I mean, like you've pointed out before, there always used to be like every city had the liberal newspaper and the conservative newspaper and stuff like that. But Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri actually came out and said, I don't think we should break up Facebook, for example, because after all, what you wind up then is with 50 little Facebooks, that you're just dividing it. He said, I think the question we need to answer is, should such a business model even exist? Should you be able to have a business where you're essentially selling your audience to your advertisers by probing deeply into their lives and getting them, voluntarily or otherwise, to cough up information about themselves so that you can monetize their souls? I'm paraphrasing.
Somebody suggested, this was just in the last week or so that I saw this, that putting a pretty hefty, rather than going for a huge regulation, because government doesn't know what the hell it's doing, or with breaking things up where you get, 50 little Hitlers instead of the one big Hitler, what about a pretty hefty tax on directed advertising?
Wow.
Yeah.
And then we could use that money to fight the climate change that's being caused by the giant server farms at Google and Facebook. And
That's
Twitter.
how we sell it. That's right.
Plus, you got to think about the funding of the federal social media administration, which which would be a cabinet level position. There will be a social media secretary,
And that's kind of what I'm afraid we'll end up with.
And I got to tell you, that actually doesn't sound as funny or far-fetched as I thought it might when I started down there.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
But my point is, so we don't like it because we don't like the unbelievable bias, and there's just no question about that. A lot of Democrats don't like it because they don't like the fact that they're selling information to corporations. The idea that corporations know every single thing about you is just absolutely repugnant to them. That's the government's job, and and so anyway, I just think it might be interesting to speculate on that.
Well, and the government is always pushing for the corporations to open up access to those channels so that they can be able to have access to the information that the corporations have,
even better than a tax. Maybe I'll get into this on the actual segment. But maybe I'll willingly give up even more of my privacy and share all this stuff, because I keep my Facebook time pretty limited, and I'm off Twitter completely now. I mean, my account's still there. But what about some revenue sharing? At every 5 cents for every targeted ad that Facebook or Google shoots my way, I get some of that.
Yeah, if they're going to sell you, you might as well have a piece of
give me a cut of my own action. Yeah.
Or there could be an opt-in or an opt-out function, or you're talking about 50 little Hitlers, but if you had 50, look, the whole reason Facebook works is because of network effect.
Exactly.
And we're way past peak Facebook, by the way, in my opinion. However, it would be interesting to see what would happen if there was, let's say instead of 50 pieces, let's say there were five, and one of them was kind of the conservative thing. You'd be able to get the message out within that cell, At least it'd be better than the suppression. I don't know what the answer is, but I do want to speculate about it because I think it's a big issue. And
given how long Facebook's been around, I'm still stunned. Because I'm the one who's posting the videos on Facebook, and I'm stunned that the interface is as clunky as it is. You can't.
I'm sorry. On which?
On Facebook.
On Facebook, yeah.
Yeah, when you post a link to a YouTube video, it can't process that properly, and it kind of, if there's a thumbnail picture that goes with the video, it cuts it off, and it doesn't automatically post that. A lot of times I have to go to this developer's website and have the Facebook scraped and then go back and repaste it because it doesn't show up right. Yeah. I'm like, wait a minute, how are these people even in business when they can't do a basic thing that every blogger in the country knows how to do?
Because it's all automated.
Well, they certainly as a group deserve a comeuppance. The arrogance of these people and the contempt they have for their audience, not just conservatives, their entire audience, the contempt that they have. And I think this is why they're so fascinated with artificial intelligence. It's sexy. It's something they think they can control, and it makes up for a large deficiency of natural intelligence. But in any event, so I want to do that one for the main show. And then for members, I want to go, I'm going back to Richard Fernandez again on Instapundit because he posted something really interesting about the, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, I'll check it. It's the Donatist heresy. Do you know that about that, Scott? Biblical thing?
No.
Okay, so according to the tweet from, or according to the article, basically what he's saying is that that Western societies become a modern version of the Donatist heresy. It's a 4th century belief that, quote, Christian clergy must be faultless for their ministry to be effective and their prayers and sacraments to be valid. Must be faultless.
This is Donatist.
Was not faultless,
I guess you could pronounce it either
damage?
way. Okay. Yeah, and the idea that the servants of God are somehow without flaw. It's to a lesser extent, John Wesley had this kind of idea of Christian perfectionism too. That somehow that if you lived long enough and you were truly following Jesus, that you would achieve this point where you were not actually sinning. Not just that you were forgiven for your sin, but that you were actually not sinning anymore.
Forgive me for this. You'd be working towards Jesus, I guess, is what you'd be doing.
I keep working my way back to you, Lord.
But here's the point, though. Here's what he says. So he says if King is not flawless, if Martin Luther King has serious allegations against him proven, then he becomes excommunicated, essentially. But the point that he made is he actually put together things in a way that I thought was very clear. We've talked about all of them before, but I really like this. So basically, in the second paragraph on Instapundit, he says, modern woke Donatism has plunged public life into a frenzy of virtue signaling since today truth comes from virtue. The highest form of virtue is victimhood, which is practically the new martyrdom, a necessary prerequisite for any public argument to be taken seriously. That has resulted, Psychology Today notes, in an epidemic of victim hoaxes. So victim hoax happens because a victim hoax makes you a victim, assuming it's not discovered.
This is like the Jussie Smollett thing.
Yeah, perfect example. So if you're a victim and a martyr, then you are of greater virtue. And if you're of greater virtue, your value of your version of the truth has more weight than somebody else's. It doesn't have to be connected to the actual truth, of course. No. But this is entirely how the psychology works. Who's the top victim? And that person trumps everybody else. And that's why Barack Obama was elected in 2008. Hillary Clinton was playing, women are victims. And along comes this black guy who goes, yeah, but black people are more victims than women are. I mean, there's really no question about it. So, back of the line you go.
Glenn Reynolds has been saying for years on Instapundit that if it weren't for fake hate crimes, there'd be hardly any hate crimes at all. And you think about it, people don't fake rob themselves.
This is my point.
Unless they're committing, some kind of insurance fraud. People don't fake murder their neighbor. I mean, the only crime you have in great numbers that's faked is hate crime. And that's because it's the new currency, is being a victim.
If you have to fake a racist attack on yourself by Donald Trump supporters, that is compelling evidence that there are no attacks on Donald Trump by Donald Trump supporters on anybody. If you can't point to a single example of this happening, and you have to invent it, that not only is clear, it's proving that there's no racism or thuggery involved, because there's no examples. There's not one example you can pick. You have to go out and invent them.
You can think of one, or you can't, Steve?
I can't.
Oh, can't. Yeah, it's become, and that's not to say that it's never happened historically in our country. And frankly, I wouldn't have used the word hate crime. I think any physical or assault, even non-physical assault against somebody else is a crime because you're hurting somebody. I don't care what your motivation was. I don't care if you killed them because you were in love with them. That doesn't make it better. And if you killed them because you hated them, it doesn't make them worse. They're dead. Yeah. And you did it.
And you're a killer. That's right.
But that's the kind of rational thinking that made the West as successful as it is.
And we're going to change that. Fix it.
We're in a life and death struggle with this. But we do have the advantage of truth being on our side, number one. And we also have the advantage that, a significant advantage, is that our philosophy is sustainable. It's a sustainable philosophy. It says that these principles are timeless and they'll always be timeless, and anybody can participate in them, and everybody's equal. The victimhood cult is like, it's like Highlander, it's like all the immortals are eventually going to fight. There can only be one in the end. The top victim will then be crowned, and every other person who doesn't reach top victimhood will be destroyed because of the Donatist heresy. We saw, how many people have we seen thrown under the bus? Geraldine Ferraro, the woman was the saint of the Democratic Party. Absolutely thrown under the bus before she died because she said Barack Obama has no real qualifications except that he's black. And all of them, gone, non grata.
I've been stunned, even though we did that Bill Whittle Now show last week about this author David Garrow's revelation in Standpoint, conservative British journal, that the FBI has tapes of Martin Luther King engaged in orgies, engaged in observing others raping a woman and laughing about it.
This isn't like consensual kind of thing. This is a whole nother level.
No, and but all of that said, that seems to me to be a big story, especially when someone from the left brings it forward. A guy who was essentially the hagiographer of Martin Luther King. He was not just a biographer; he was in praise of King, to come forward with this information. And in the last week, I have noticed very little in any kind of mainstream
it's not exactly
media
dominating the headlines, is it?
And you know what?
But Donald Trump showed up at an event with his hair slicked back.
But I'm actually kind of glad about this. Roger Simon, our former boss, wrote what I thought was a really touching column last week about just this. Asking, do we have any heroes left? And MLK was one of his heroes. I mean, he was in the South, working for civil rights during the 60s. This is very personal to him. He was there. He went there and did that, and he raised in his column the old Shakespearean difference between the doer and the deed. And we may find out that Martin Luther King did some horrible things and had some horrible attitudes and all the rest, but it doesn't change the fact that he led the civil rights movement and made this country a better place, more in tune with its founding ideals.
It seems like you could almost apply that argument to somebody like George Washington.
You could, in fact, couldn't you? Or Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah. Well, and it's not that I want to see King crucified. I certainly don't. I mean, he's already been slaughtered.
I want them hoisted by their own petard, only not so that King can be slandered, only so that they are forced to admit that what you do in your private life does not negate the public good that you do. It may negate or it may modify your opinion of that person as a person, but the work is the work. And that's the part that
well, and the reality is, if the people around him who knew this was going on back in the 1960s, and there had to have been many who were aware of it. If the people around him and knew what was been going on were not enabling this, but rather calling him on it, then his work would have been over. Now, maybe somebody else picks up the mantle and carries on, but for him to continually go out there in public and preach about the value of the individual and virtue and freedom and all that kind of stuff, while being privately, participating in egregious activities, that. I guess what Bill is saying is, these people today who want to lambaste everybody who has this conflict.
Pull down statues.
Yeah, they're not going to go back and pull down Martin Luther King's statue, but one wonders why there wasn't anybody near Dr. King at the time who said, "Hey, Martin, you can't do this, and if you keep doing it, I'm gonna tell. I'm gonna go. This is not right. You're sullying the movement by doing this. If in fact all of this turns out to be true, and the FBI did not just figure out a way in the 1960s to fake Martin Luther King's voice on a tape."
I don't imagine a guy who's spent his life worshiping Martin Luther King is going to go public about writing a book like this unless he saw incontrovertible evidence, and a lot of it.
Just is there something about human nature that great men and women are horrible people?
As a quick aside, I'd been working on some stuff on Apollo 11, and I got more into the weeds than I thought I would with this about Wernher von Braun, and the morality of him, and using him as an example for the other 1,600 German rocket scientists that we got during Operation Paperclip after the war, because we wouldn't be on the moon without von Braun. It just wouldn't have happened. It just wouldn't have happened. So the question is, was this moon landing and NASA morally tainted by its use of a guy who was in service to the Nazis, was a member of the Nazi Party, was a member of the Allgemein, or it must be Allgemein SS, and so on, and these are serious issues. But looking at his life, I said, he claims that he was told that if he doesn't join the Nazi Party, he will not do any more rocket research in 1937. That sounded reasonable to me, but the point I made was, so if he hadn't signed up by the end of 1937, he's already seen the Berlin Olympics. He's already seen the 1934 Nuremberg rally. And Hitler's been famous since 1923. It's 14 years this guy's had a chance to join the Nazi movement and doesn't.
Until they put a gun to his career.
It sounds to me like he waited until he no longer had any choice. The guy wanted to build rockets. And that, and these are the kind of like nuances that give you some insight into the person. And by the way, the Allgemein SS was specifically created to set it aside from the Waffen SS. It was sort of an administrative branch of the SS. It was specifically designed so that it was not Waffen SS. Waffen SS was the armed SS. That was the SS that ran the death camps, and that was the SS that exterminated prisoners and all the rest of it. So I'm looking at this situation here, and I'm trying to figure out, I don't want to land on the wrong side of this. But when it was over, I just thought, I don't see anything. I don't see anything there other than a guy who wanted to make rockets. He said, I know this is way off stream. He said when he heard the first report that the V2 had landed in London, he said, well, it appears that the rocket performed perfectly, except it landed on the wrong planet. And to which many years later, Mort Saul said, yeah, I keep aiming for the stars and I keep hitting London.
Tom Lehrer had a similar gag, and he had a Wernher von Braun song. And there's a line, I think it's the end of the song, where he says, I send the rockets up. Where they come down is not my department, said Wernher von Braun.
Yeah. Anyway, it's an interesting question, and these are interesting issues. But mostly, I want to deal with what he really nailed, which is that you have to be a martyr now in this religion, and that Jesse Smollett did it because his victimhood status was not high enough, He thought that being black and gay would get him all the attention he possibly needed, but apparently it wasn't enough. So he had to go for the gold ring. He had to be a victim of a racial and sexual hate crime, which is the grand slam, bases loaded, grand slam, bottom of the ninth victimhood.
You are on the top of the victim pyramid, or is that an inverted pyramid?
Wow. Okay. Young
Happy
Stephen
fun
Green.
time. Yes.
Young Stephen.
Did we ask you yet this question of great import?
Well, ask me and I'll tell you.
We're going for a record here today, boys.
What would you like to do?
Are we?
What would you like to do for your episode of Right Angle this week?
I would like to talk about this remarkable young man. He was a high school and then college football player. Big guy, 275 pounds, all of it muscle, just a hell of a guy. Injury sidelined his college football career, but he was a great student and all the rest. Junior year, discovers he's got testicular cancer. He's hoping it's stage 1. It turns out it's metastasized into his lymph nodes, stage 3. He underwent the surgery, and then he had to undergo 16 weeks of chemo, and this 275-pound kid became just a bald husk of his former self. But he stayed in school, and not only did he just graduate, but this was no ordinary school. He just graduated as a second lieutenant from the United States Air Force Academy, just down the road from here. Just a remarkable story. People will tell you that people drop out of the academy. I won't say all the time, but there are a lot of cadets who just can't cut it because the school is just that damn tough. And this kid finished up his junior and senior years battling and then recovering from 2 types of cancer. And I want to talk about him. His name's Parker Hammond.
I'm glad you do. It's a great clip, and I also like the fact that President Trump called attention to the fact that the entire class, like the entire university, not just the graduating class, backed this guy all the way, almost carried him across the finish line, kind of thing. And
the academy wanted him out because they didn't think medically he was going to be able to serve in the Air Force. So let's just let him graduate and then not let him receive his lieutenant's bars.
Can't keep a good man down.
Nope.
And I love Trump's his final little line as the guy's walking back to his chair. He's looking around and he goes, "There's a lot of good-looking people in this school."
It's a great clip, and we're going to run that. I think as I don't know. What do you think? Should it go after my intro, or should it go closer to the end?
I would set it up, then we run it, and then we talk about it.
All right, excellent. Because I've got some good questions for you both.
You just made me think of that. Like the president is like that role that I believe it was Joe Montana played on a Saturday Night Live years ago, where he was in this skit. And the idea of the skit, he and Bill Murray and I think Gilda Radner were in it. And the idea behind the skit was that we would hear what people are really thinking when they say something. And so, Bill Murray was trying to woo this young lady, and he would say, something just sort of vacuous, like, "Hey, it's really nice to see you tonight." But inside his head, he was like, "Oh, I hope I can get her in bed," that kind of thing. Anyway, when Joe Montana, Bill's roommate, comes home unexpectedly early, he introduces him and he says, "This is my roommate Joe," and she shakes hands, and he says, Joe says, "It's nice to meet you." And in his head, you hear this voice go, "It's nice to meet her." And so that's the sense that I get from President Trump. Like, he's just walking along and he's thinking, "Wow, what a bunch of nice looking people."
And he
Man,
said,
what a bunch of nice looking people. Okay, so
I love it.
So our friend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who's one of the Democratic hopefuls who is running 30 points behind Joe Biden for the nomination, has a proposal that he's been pushing for a long time to deal with the politicization of the Supreme Court, because we recently became aware that the Supreme Court was politicized. I don't know what event it was that precipitated that within the last 2 years.
Totally new information.
Conservative majority was just just sheer coincidence.
It was. Suddenly, this has become a major issue. And so Mayor Pete's idea, excuse me, I forgot the honorific, is that we would expand the court and not just pack the court in the old proud FDR attempt tradition. No. But what we would do is we would take, the court would have essentially 5 justices who are Republican leaners and 5 justices who are Democrat leaners. And then those 10 people would choose another 5 justices, ostensibly who were completely unbiased because the Democrats and Republicans would have to agree on these people to choose them. So that resulted in another proposal, and where did I get this? New Republic by a guy named Matt Ford, who basically said, look, that's not going to work because any attempt to depoliticize the Supreme Court is quixotic at best. You're tilting at windmills here. It's not going to happen. And so his idea is basically to constrain the court in other ways by a kind of randomization and term limit combination that would be an amendment to the Constitution. Now, Matt Ford acknowledges up front that it's very difficult to amend the Constitution, but he's thinking ultimately, since we can't win these judicial wars, because even if you manage to get a bunch of your guys on the court this time around, eventually the tide turns and they get a bunch of the guys on the court. So what he's hoping to do is get rid of these judicial wars because we can't win them. And his suggestion is basically to randomly select Supreme Court judges from the 11 circuits of the, and actually 12 if you include D.C., but the 12 federal appellate court circuits. So if you were an appellate...
Like Obama did.
Yeah. Like if you're an appellate...
The farm team for the Supreme Court.
So each, when somebody left, for example, left the court who was part of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, then they would randomly select somebody else from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Just randomly.
Yes. Yeah. So this would be some sort of randomization, a drawing, and then that person would be elevated to the court. But they would have a limited term, and that term wouldn't begin right away, so that essentially you couldn't shove somebody on the court to take care of something that you know is going to be before the court. So there'd be a delay before that person got on the court. And then the Chief Justice may still be selected by the President of the United States, and maybe the Senate has to confirm all of these judges. But the idea would be it would be so apolitical that that it wouldn't be a big problem and that it would be a perfunctory approval process. So I thought it was an interesting approach. First of all, just the whole idea that there are people who think that, man, if we could only arrange the Supreme Court differently, then things would come out the way we want them to.
But they did. They did come out the way they wanted them to. They had the court arranged exactly the way they wanted it for 40 years, and things came out exactly the way they wanted it to. Of course they want this back. Yeah. This is the only lever they have. They can't convince people to vote for their policies, and they have to enforce them by law. They have to make sure that laws that they don't like are nullified, and that the bench then legislates the laws that they do want. If they lose the court, it's all over for them.
And
of course we're here 1,000 new plans.
Yeah, and then his next proposal would be, and once we have this apolitical Supreme Court, they can choose what replaces the Electoral College.
That's right.
Well,
maybe we could.
The guy was saying,
what would be great would be we could have like a giant clear ball and names on like ping pong balls floating around on the inside, and Vanna White could come down or somebody like that. Maybe she's so dated, obviously. Taylor Swift come down and she'll open a valve and a guy's name will pop out. It's like, Justice John Martin, you're now a member of the Supreme Court of the United States of America.
That's true. There would be this guy with a flamboyant suit and big hair, and he would say, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the girl on fire.
You'll also get a year's supply of rice-a-roni, the San Francisco treat.
Oh, my God.
So you don't forget, call before midnight tonight. So anyway, they have, it's interesting because he says the federal appellate court judges could still have lifetime tenure, but you'd put a term limit, maybe 18 years or something, on Supreme Court justices. And after the Chief Justice is done serving on the Supreme Court, at least the Chief Justice, I don't know if he included the other ones in this or not, but you could go back to the appellate bench. So you could return to an appellate court if you wish to continue your career as essentially a federal judge. And this guy seems a lot more targeted towards saying, hey, how can we depoliticize it? Now, the thing that occurred to me, guys,
That's a lie.
was the same thing that I say when it comes to Congress. If you're concerned about the power that the federal government has had, why don't you limit what Congress can actually do? Like, just take out of their, like, for example, don't let any congressman be able to steer funding or designate funding or earmark funding to their particular district. Why don't you prevent congressmen from having anything to do with allocating specific dollars toward projects that they favor, and don't let them serve as consultants after they get out. And I think you would just radically cut down on the number of craven individuals who would want to serve. And so why not let's put the Supreme Court...
And fortunately, we have an endless supply of those, so we don't have to worry about shortages in that regard.
That's right. But, if you just said to the Supreme Court...
You do change the incentives, and that's important.
Yeah. And the Supreme Court, by the way, is going to get to adjudicate cases that are specifically the way the Constitution frames them. If there are cases that don't come under the jurisdiction of any other court, in other words, maritime cases involving one state suing another state and things like that, or foreign individuals suing a state or an individual within the United States, then that's the Supreme Court's purview. But their real job isn't to review whether legislation is constitutional or not.
Correct.
But just to rule within the context of the legislation. This guy wins the case, which then would cause an uproar in the public, and they'd say, we got to go back and change that legislation, which is exactly the way
That's exactly right.
Before.
Yes. So no doubt they have a strategy to change the court instantly, because the second that the court responded to little d democratic forces at work, then the system is suddenly absolutely corrupt and obsolete and needs to go.
A lot more open to arguments that say, I'm open to process arguments that say, how can we make this function in a way that is appropriate within the context of the Constitution? I'm not really sympathetic to arguments that say, how can we make sure that the court consists of people who will vote for the things we like?
Yeah.
No matter which side that comes from.
Well, that's how it works now.
And you can,
the president is elected by the states. The people in the states vote for president, and then the president you get is a guy who has won the greatest support from the American public, and he appoints a justice according to the mood of the country at the time, and it works just fine. It's not working for them right now, so it has to be destroyed.
And I'm really also open to the suggestion that somebody would say, well, why does such an ephemeral character as a president, who at most is going to survive 8 years, get to create a stamp on the court that could last for a generation or more?
Well, that's why they have to have Senate approval. That's why. The president doesn't just get to do this in a vacuum.
The lifetime appointment was put in place to eliminate pressure on justices in order to sway their votes. In other words, what congressmen spend half of their time running for election the next time, and there's always people ready to line up and buy them stuff, and so on. And the idea of a lifetime appointment meant that you've got this job, it's not going anywhere, and it was designed to reduce influence, basically money influence on the court.
I'll tell you what, though, I'm a little tired of this idea that a lifetime appointment means until you drop dead at work.
Well, see, and that's what Associate Justice Stephen Breyer said. Back in April, Stephen Breyer said, basically, I think it'd be fine to have long terms, let's say 18 years for a Supreme Court justice. It would make life easier, he says. I wouldn't have to worry about when I'm going to have to retire or not. And I think what he seems to be saying there is, like right now, there's all this chatter about when or if Ruth Bader Ginsburg, for example, is going to retire. And that really doesn't seem to fit with a stable judiciary atmosphere to say, well, we can swing the tide of something if Ruth just retires when we want her to.
Yeah.
If we all knew she was done in 18 years.
You had left-wingers openly calling for her death before Trump could get sworn in. I mean,
yeah. No, if you cannot make a decision that you are no longer able to function as a Supreme Court justice, if you're not able to make a ruling on that, then you're probably in the wrong line of work.
Yeah, but that's not the question. The question isn't her competence. The question is, if she's absent from the court, then somebody's going to replace her who is not like her. And so therefore she wants to hang on until the next president gets in. But if she had an 18-year term, she would just be done
none of her business.
Whenever.
But it's people like Ginsburg that politicized the court in the first place. That's why she's hanging on. And that's why she's having documentaries about her like she's like she's Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's like, no.
Notorious RBG.
Yeah, you can't come to work anymore. You are incapacitated. Thank you for your service. The times when you were elected or appointed rather are not the same times as today. Votes matter. You should know that more than anybody.
Take the pill.
Learn to code.
Learn to code. All right, ladies and gentlemen. I've literally run out of terabytes on my iMac here to store this
We've
video.
set a record.
A record has been blew it
Oh,
away.
this is a new record.
It's like running the mile in 3 minutes and
My guess is with my ancient
seconds.
iMac here that I've captured one frame for every 30 that you guys got. So we are going to go about the business of recording these episodes of Right Angle, and we do that with the tailwind and the blessing, and for the benefit of our members at BillWhittle.com. We are grateful to your ministrations to us, and for the fact that, by the way, Bill, I noticed today the blog at BillWhittle.com, which has only existed for a few months now, has had some 662 posts.
Wow.
That's amazing.
And almost none of those were by me.
So are we giving away like a Bill Whittle mug to the 1,000th blog post writer?
Yeah, I don't think we should get into major expenses like that.
Okay.
I do have one.
I will descend the steps from the building, and I will go out to the sidewalk, and I will present the winner with a shiny new dime, and that's what we'll do.
With your own picture of FDR.
Yeah, we're going to
ladies and
refill
gentlemen.
petty cash.
At Rockefeller, here's a dime. Here's a dime. Oh, for the love of God.
So that's it for this episode of Backstage. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for your encouraging notes. Thank you for your blog posts. And thanks for the memories. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott, and he's Stephen Green on one side or the other here. We'll see you soon.